Today on Up Front, Democrats try to pressure Republican Senator Ron Johnson into action on the U.S. Supreme Court vacancy. Next, Johnson on why he's standing firm against the president's pick. Then, the battle over Wisconsin's voter ID law, an ACLU attorney on why the fight isn't dead yet, and what could happen next in the case. And a primary in a Milwaukee area Senate district, why one Democratic lawmaker is challenging another.
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Up Front with Mike Gousha.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Up Front. Democrats continue their efforts to ramp up the pressure on select Republican U.S. senators to consider President Obama's nominee for the vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. One of those senators is Wisconsin's Republican Ron Johnson. Johnson's Democratic colleague, Senator Tammy Baldwin, met with Judge Merrick Garland last week. She has also joined public calls for Johnson, who is running for re-election this year, to vote on Garland's nomination. Senator Johnson has said he might meet Garland, but it won't change his mind about the Obama appointment. Senator Ron Johnson joins us again now on Up Front. Senator, good to have you back on the program.
Mike, good to be back.
And I know you've said you might meet with Merrick Garland. Are there any plans to meet with Judge Garland?
Oh, we're already talking to the White House about scheduling a meeting. I'll meet with him. I'm a pretty sociable guy. I talk to all kinds of folks, so I'm happy to meet with him. But yeah, my view hasn't changed here. That in such a unique moment in time, a couple months, literally 7 months before an election now, let the American people have a voice in terms of the direction of the Supreme Court. They're going to decide the direction of the country. Why not the Supreme Court? So makes perfectly reasonable. Plus, we are two co-equal branches of government. President Obama did nominate. Our job is advice. We advised him not to, but he didn't take that advice. And then consent. And withholding our consent is also an appropriate viewpoint. I am doing my job, from my standpoint, protecting Wisconsinites' Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And I would argue our First Amendment rights, too, in terms of free speech and freedom of religion. Take a look at what President Obama is doing under Obamacare to Little Sisters of the Poor. So this is an enormously consequential nomination here. It will definitely flip the Supreme Court if we have Judge Garland confirmed, so we're not going to allow that to happen.
So to those who say you're being an obstructionist here, you say?
No. I'm doing my job. My job is advice and consent. Withholding consent is part of that equation as well. So we're a co-equal branch of government, and by the way, the American people spoke in 2014, most recently, by giving Republicans a majority of the Senate, which is the other co-equal branch in this nomination confirmation process.
Okay, so let me be devil's advocate here. What would be the harm in holding hearings if you were able to, for example, press Judge Garland on his views on the Second Amendment, and his answers didn't satisfy you? What would be the harm of holding hearings and then saying, nope, this is not going to be the guy?
First of all, I'm not in charge of that process. That's Leader McConnell and Senator Grassley. They've said they're not going to do it. I'm perfectly fine with that situation. Again, we're not going to allow the Supreme Court to flip. We already know Judge Garland's views. We know that he would be a super legislator. Again, this is a black and white issue to me. There's no such thing as a moderate judge. You have judges who actually adhere to the text of the Constitution and the law and don't bring their own personal views in. And then we have super legislators, and that would be the liberal bloc that create rights that really aren't in the Constitution, that legislate from the bench. I didn't get elected to confirm super legislators. I got elected to confirm judges. Judge Garland would be a super legislator.
So no hearings and no votes. That's your position.
Well, that's Leader McConnell and Chuck Grassley's position, so it's not going to happen. So
you agree with that, though?
So face the reality. We're going to let the American people have a voice. They'll decide this. We've got a lot of problems facing this nation. Let's move on. Let's go through the appropriation process. Let's start thoughtfully prioritizing spending. How about secure our border? And, of course, later today we're going to be talking about the enormous problem of heroin and drug abuse in this country.
Quick question about the campaign. How would you be affected? There's a lot of talk about coattails in the fall election. How do you think you would be affected by either Donald Trump or Ted Cruz being at the top of the ticket?
I'm not a political pundit. I'm a manufacturer from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, so I really don't know. My own goal was really laid out by Speaker Gingrich when he was talking to me. He said the only reason Harry Truman ever became president is because he was outperformed by 6 Senate Democrats in their state. So that's just my own personal goal, tap into the grassroots effort here in Wisconsin. And I think the primary results are pretty promising. There were 1.1 million Republicans came out to vote for that primary, only 1 million Democrats, and they were both some pretty heated contests. So I'm encouraged. We got a very strong grassroots effort here, and I've got a good story to tell. Our Joseph Project, using inner city churches here in Milwaukee to connect people with the opportunities that exist. We got a really good story to tell. I've actually produced results, Mike. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, we passed 69 pieces of legislation by using an approach, a business person's approach, trying to find areas of agreement. 24 of those pieces of legislation have been signed into law. I bet you didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself as an underdog in this race?
I think it's a dead even race. I think we'll go right down to the wire. Yeah, it always has been. That's certainly my internal polls have been showing us that. It was nice that Marquette finally had to do a screen on election screen prior to the primary. So it's a dead even race. I think even Senator Feingold acknowledges that.
I want to talk about an issue that's emerging in this race, and this is the heroin and opioid epidemic in this country. You held a hearing along with Senator Baldwin, bipartisan, interestingly, a hearing in Pewaukee on Friday to talk about this. Where is this in terms of priorities for the nation right now, the problems we're seeing with heroin and with opioids?
It's an enormous problem, not only in terms of the crime it generates on our city streets and in every community, but the broken lives, the broken families, the increase in overdoses. But also, one of the reasons we're really concentrating this in my committee, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, is we've held 15 hearings on border security, published a 100-page report. Our conclusion, among many causes, I would say the number one root cause of our unsecured border is America's insatiable demand for drugs, because it's given rise to drug cartels who control any part of the Mexican side of the border they choose to. They're destroying public institutions in Mexico and in Central America. This drug abuse in America is a nexus of so many problems. We've got to address it, and we have not adequately addressed it, not by a long shot.
Is it more of a law enforcement border security issue, or is it a treatment issue? What is
it's across the board. We have to try and find more effective treatments, but let's face it, it's enormously difficult to break this habit. So why not address the demand side? Try and dissuade all Americans, particularly young people, from ever taking an addictive opiate, which just leads to other problems. But it's also interdiction. General Kelly, head of Southern Command, said that we have visibility over 90% of the illegal drugs that are flowing into this country, and yet we only interdict 5 to 10% on the southern border. So we can see it, we just don't have the capability of interdicting. But it's addressing the supply-demand, or the supply side, the demand side, and obviously we've got to treat people too, because these are tragedies that are occurring with people's lives.
You have your own personal experience with that. You lost a nephew?
A couple of months ago, nephew died, and on my drive up here today, a friend of mine that I played softball with, his daughter's been struggling with heroin addiction. Just got readmitted into a facility. So no, this is an incredibly difficult. Any habit is hard to kick when it comes to opiate addiction. The best way to avoid it is never, get addicted.
Senator Ron Johnson, the Republican who's running for re-election this year. Thanks very much for being with us today.
Have a good day.
And next on Up Front, the latest legal twist in Wisconsin's voter ID law, the voters potentially affected, and what could happen next in that case. Then later, how a Democratic lawmaker hopes to unseat a veteran senator in his own party. That's when Up Front continues.
Up Front with Mike Gousha, brought to you by the American Transmission Company and the Wisconsin Corn Growers Association.